we're going to go in some chunks, maybe like 20 minutes at a time.
Okay.
I'll check the mic in between and stuff. If you don't mind, I'll give you a little break if you need some water or whatever.
Okay, dokie.
Great. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Marcos Raya. We're going to start with some general questions about your upbringing, your background, where you're from. You
Okay.
can tell us about where you came from.
Okay. Well, I was born in Irapuato, Guanajuato, which is like almost at the center of Mexico, the country. It was a beautiful town. We have a very fertile lands where there's a lot of fruit and stuff. It's a lot of business among the peasants. So I had a magical childhood. I met Chavez Morado, the last of the Mexican murals. He was working on a project. I will never forget when I saw it. I was 10 years old. So it's easy to say that my first impressions of art was murals. And I like the fact that Chavez Morado kind of represented, like, like the priest, like he was the man who would engage with the people and paint about their history, and he was a political, and I like that. It was my beginnings.
How does a little kid from a small town meet a world-class artist like that?
The teacher took us there. She took the whole school from Irapuato to Guanajuato, Guanajuato is a state, and it's a very historical town. That's where Diego Rivera was born. And they also say that David Alfaro Siqueiros was born in Irapuato. I knew that the Siqueiros family, and this lady told me, says, they don't want to let people know about something in the family, but he was born in Irapuato, where I was born. And so, Irapuato is in what they call the Bible Belt. They are extremely pseudo-religious. And Guanajuato is where the ultra-right government was, political party was born, El PAN. Those are the guys responsible for putting Mexico in such a bad situation. For 80 years, Mexico has been poor by force. And I remember since I was a little boy, when I would watch the news, I would feel really happy when I saw something related to the students of the university in Mexico, how they protested against the corruption of the government. I was always happy to see that there was resistance.
I read that your mother was born in Illinois, but I didn't know an explanation for that. Like, were your grandparents?
My grandfather arrived in Chicago in 1900, which means we've been here for quite a while. My mother was born here. She worked in a factory. Oh no, that was later. She was deported in the 30s. When they deported 1 million Mexicans, she was one of them.
That's a massive repatriation.
Right.
An infamous moment in Mexican American history.
So she arrived in Mexico at the age of 8. And she used to tell us about, how poor we were, and it was horrible. So my father never wanted to come here. My father was an artist too. He was an artist and a musician. He would make a living as a musician, but he made some really beautiful things. I used to help him. He used to work with wood and make three-dimensional objects, and he used to make these ships, they look like the ones that where the Spaniards came. And it was so magical because he made it all with all the details, So then my mother came back to Chicago when I was 2 years old. This is important because that means I grew up with my mother. And it could have been worse, but I lived with my aunt and my father and my uncle. But I was unruly. I was never a bad boy, just unruly, because I had no one to give me direction. So at the time I was 15, I had my first drink, which is typical in Mexico. By the time you're 15, you're supposed to be a man. You're supposed to drink, especially in the 50s. The so-called golden years of Mexican culture. It was the alcohol that was, the king, in the movies, in songs, everywhere, you know, borracha. And now I look at it and I say, wow, you know, if you really look at it, I think alcohol killed more Mexicans than two revolutions put together.
You talked a lot about alcoholism
Yeah.
record, you know. Do you think that started when you were 15? I mean,
Oh yeah, well, I just mentioned it, how Mexico not only nationalized that, they also nationalized the fact that you're supposed to drink in the movies. And so, you know, you are a victim of circumstances. My father drank. He was a musician, and I grew up in a little street where it used to be the Red District at one time. And I saw the characters that used to live there. You know, it was it's like a Fellini movie. I remember, you know, boxers, shadow, boxing, blind musicians, all prostitutes, all these I saw as a little boy. And but then my mother sent me some money to go to my uncle's house in Mexico City. My uncle was born in St. Louis, and he was a good-looking guy. And he became the captain of Aeromexico. You know, he was because he was in the Korean War, and he made a nice decision of coming to Mexico, so they needed pilots. But he became a captain, and he lived in a section that looked almost like I was in the United States. It was a gated community where all the rich politicians lived. Pedregal de San Angel. I remember. I stayed there for 3 months while I was getting my papers. It was, you know, back then the division between the province and Mexico City was big. That's why Chilangos, they think they're big, you know, but not anymore because of globalization, you know, everybody's connected, no? But back then I was considered like a
hick.
yeah. But it was good because it was like a cultural shock for me, from a little town to Mexico City, then from Mexico City to Chicago.
You were 15 or 16?
15.
And was that stay in Mexico City part of your arts education? You know, did you?
No, but yeah, I was doing some sketching and doing things with my uncle while I was there. It came automatically. I did a little, the Tinker of Rodin, a little sculpture. And I was already picking little books here and there. And of course I went to see the murals of the Mexicans, and they slapped my face. You know, it's like, wake up, wow, you know. So from there, I ended up in Chicago. I arrived, my mother lived on Taylor Street, the Italian neighborhood. So by the time I arrived there, where the university is, it was a big empty lot. It was a big empty lot. It was part of the Chicago Renault thing. Most of the immigrants moved. Most of the Mexicans, there were only about 2 families left on Taylor Street. My mother lived there until she died. I never saw my mother walking down Pilsen. She hated it. So I remember when I arrived on a Sunday, and I told my mother, because, you know, Taylor Street looked pretty disgusting. I says, you know, I says, this is ugly. I want to go back to Mexico. She goes, no, you're not. You have a job and you're going to go to school. I go, when? Tomorrow. Well, okay. So then she got me a little job that I hated. But it was a good beginning. You know, not only that I started to like to read books, you know, to study.
Can I ask you a couple questions about the Taylor Street? We've read a lot about that history of Mexican, Italians, other immigrant groups, ethnic groups living in that area that became UIC and their displacement. That's how Pilsen gets really Mexican around 1960, I think.
Yeah.
Were you part of that? Were you witness to that displacement?
Yeah. I used to hang out with a little clique. They call us the Taylor Barracudas. And we're just friends, you know, hanging out with our girls and stuff. But it's easy to say that as a little group, we couldn't fit in any part of the Taylor Street thing because I don't know if it was racism or if it was, they can work together. It's like right now, It's so divided, so segregated. But that's one of the reasons why I decided to leave Taylor Street for Pilsen, all by myself. I left my mother's house when I was around 17, between 17 and 18.
So 17, 18, you moved to Pilsen.
No. I moved to Old Town.
Old Town.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I arrived right at the moment at the beginning of what do you call it? The 60s, 1960s summer of love. So it was a deep change, living in a working class neighborhood, dealing with working class issues, and into a society that was changing. The 60s, it was really exciting for me to.
What was Old Town like? Was it full of hippies?
It was like Greenwich Village, or whatever was happening in San Francisco. It was the center of the counterculture. I saw the groups that later became famous, like the Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplanes and the sit-ins and sit-ins against the war in Vietnam. So it was something new for me. I wouldn't have that knowledge of things if I would have stayed in Pilsen. I think if I would have stayed in Pilsen, I would have ended up another Mexican nationalist.
How did you change when you encountered the counterculture?
Okay, well, I stayed in Old Town for about 3 months because I was being groomed to go to a private school in Lenox, Massachusetts, with a full scholarship from the University of Illinois. And I was part of that thing called the War on Poverty. And they chose, working class kids like me who had possibilities. My art teacher saw possibilities in me, and he's the one that got me the scholarship. So I think it would have been a lot better if you would have sent me to the Art Institute, but they sent me to this little town called Lenox. And I ended up in this school where, it was like an elite school where there was 100 boys, 100 girls. I saw people like Thelonious Monk Jr., the brother of the Mamas and the Papas, and Steve Skoll, who is the first one to buy stuff from Andy Warhol. It was rich kids. And it was a cultural thing for me because, I'm a working class kid, right? So, I spent most of the time in the studio. And the teacher used to take us to New York at least once a month. And one show that I saw that changed my vision or my position as a student was when we went to MoMA. We went to see the International Surrealist Show. And it was right on time because at that time, the youth were being rebellious and we were experimenting with some really heavy-duty stuff, like hashish and all kinds of things. And I must say I took them a couple of times only because I wanted to, like they say, expand my any work, to go into the alleys of your mind that you will never be able to experiment,
like acid or
acid or mushrooms,
Yeah.
but only once or twice, and with a sketchbook. I even have the sketches still, and I must say that a lot of people don't mention it that they didn't help, but I do, because when someone says don't trust a man that doesn't drink, no, don't trust an artist that doesn't drink. So don't trust an artist that hasn't experimented with some kind of, drugs.
You're in your late teens at this point? You're in Lenox?
I'm 18.
18?
19.
Going to New York, expanding your horizons, and that International Surrealist Show at MoMA. How
Right.
does it change what you think art is or what?
Well, because of the fact that my first impression so far was the murals, I came with that in mind when I came to Chicago, but then they changed when I I saw a picture not bigger than, just murals. Because as a matter of fact, in one of my classes, I was looking at a book on murals, and the teacher he didn't like it. He didn't like that I would go that way. And now I understand him. But back then, it's around the time when there was no Mexicans in school. We didn't have no Chicano studies. We didn't have nothing of that. The only guy I remember that he wanted to be my friend was a guy from Venezuela. But he acted and think more like a gringo than a gringo. So I said, you guys can be my friend. I think he was some kind of, he came from a rich Venezuelan oil.
And you're the scholarship kid. I mean, you must be like a super minority.
Yes,
yes.
Yes.
Do you think that that minority status would have shaped your later vision as an artist at all, or?
Well, if I go back to back then, the blacks were already revolting. They surrounded the time they killed Malcolm X and then Luther King, and so I for some unknown reason, I feel like in the middle of this tension between whites and blacks, right? And then I will tell myself, well, I'm brown, or but I tended towards the things that were happening, like the counterculture. I like the music. I like jazz, and I like blues. But nevertheless, I came to the conclusion back then. I don't know if I still think about it, but I told myself that black power and white power are the two extremes, and they left us right in the middle. And you can see some of the Hollywood movies where the whites and the blacks are the ones that go around the world kicking ass. And the first one to die is probably a Mexican or an Arab. And then the blacks. And then at the end, the whites don't die. That's Hollywood. So I was, into culture that dealt with the history of art, and surrealism helped me in a way to understand, especially Marcel Duchamp. He was still alive. I should have went to look for him. Some girl says, maybe this is good you didn't go see him. I say, why? He goes, maybe he would be an asshole. Maybe.
They say don't meet your heroes.
So, Duchamp said something that it stuck to me. He said something like, I stopped painting at the age of 22 because I saw that painting can be extremely mechanical. The artist can only come out with maybe 5, 6 masterpieces. The rest are just pure repetition.